Utah has done a tremendous job of adding talented players through the transfer portal. And according to Kyle Whittingham, they're not done yet. Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, and you can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, I want to talk about the job that Utah has done replacing the players who departed via the NFL or the transfer portal. Talk about the job that Utah has done replacing those guys with incoming transfer talent and even a couple of recruits overall. And also closing out today's show by talking about what some Utah football players are currently doing in the NFL. A lot of them in action for the divisional round this weekend. So we'll talk about what they did at the end of the show. But we have to start with some very interesting comments that Kyle Whittingham made on ESPN 700. Appearing on the Bill Riley show last week, Kyle Whittingham said that they're not done adding players to the transfer portal. He said it feels good about the guys they've added so far, and they probably have half a dozen that they'll add before fall. Not really any going to come in and roll early in spring ball anymore, because now you got the semester's been going on for a couple weeks, so can't get them in for spring ball, but still some guys to add before fall camp. And he said he anticipates adding at least like 6 guys, and then as many as 10 guys, he said, could be added. And once again, that comes from an interview, Coach Whittingham appearing on the Bill Riley show on ESPN 700. So am I surprised by this? No, because when you're a team like Utah, you still have Utah added talent, but there are still more guys they can replace. As Kyle Whittingham also alluded to in this interview, you are going to have more guys leave the program. You have to always be active in the transfer portal in today's world of college football. You always have to be ready for the next player that is going to jump into the portal. And then if they're a good fit for your program and you think that they can help you make a difference, not just this year, but even going to years beyond, like a Walker Lyons that Utah added, a Tayshawn Lyons that Utah added, then that is a guy that you have to be on top of and ready to do. And that's what Utah does a good job of. I think they are ready to they have put themselves in a position to consistently add the talent they needed to help them continue to achieve their goals of not just winning Pac-12 championships, but now college football playoff appearances, with the Big 12 expanding in its current with college football expanding in its current trajectory that it's on with the 12 team. All Utah needs to do to make the college football playoff is just do what they've done the last 2 years, last 2 times in the last 3 years, I will say, because obviously the injuries prevented Utah from really even having a shot this prior year from achieving that goal, because when you don't have Cam Rising, you didn't have a chance in the loaded Pac-12 conference. So where do I think Utah could be looking to target players in the transfer portal, which once again, I think it's good that Utah is always ready, looking, and open to adding guys. The one position that I still think it's interesting that Utah has yet to add is an offensive lineman. I know this system's hard to learn. I know that there's still some young and good guys in that room. When you get 3 starters back too, right? Spencer Fano, Coley's back at center. I think Johnny Maia will also be competing with him and maybe even starting at one of the guard spots. I think Maia is a really good blocker, so I would love to see him. I think if you had to ask me, like, what's the best combination of Utah offensive linemen right now, I would probably have Maia at one of the guard spots. Honestly, I would probably have him over Kump right now, but I know Kump has the versatility and does have a lot of starts at guard under his belts, at center too. Center and guard done both, and tackle now. He's really done it all if you look over the course of his Utah career, but has struggled in a couple of those spots too. I think it's fair to say, and a lot of those guys did too. And the third starter who's back from last year, that ended the year, was Michael Mokafisi. But I also said, based on the team's performance overall this year and even in the Northwestern Bowl, none of them were bad, but I don't think any of them I watch and I'm like, oh, they're guaranteed. Like, they should just be given a starting spot. Like, yes, obviously every year everyone has to compete, but Braden Daniels was going to start at left tackle for Utah a couple years ago. Keaton Bills, Satao Laumea were going to start at those spots. I just thought last year's play, while once again, they were still good. Utah had a good offensive line. It's why they still hung in against teams like Washington, made plays against the likes of USC, but it wasn't the normal standard we saw. The Utah running game didn't dominate like we're used to seeing, and some of that was injuries to the backs like Mekhi Bernard, Jaquinton Jackson, also dealing with some stuff. That ankle injury really the one that derailed him. But I just felt like from a pass blocking standpoint, a run blocking standpoint, the Utah offensive line was good last year, but a dip from what we saw the 2 years they won the Pac-12 championship. Hence, why I thought they would be a little more aggressive and add an offensive lineman or two through the transfer portal. I'm curious to see if that's something Utah will do. I think starting on at this point, it's going to be tough, though, I will say, because the more I think about it, it's going to be very hard to learn this playbook. I feel like just from when you enroll in summer camp and then fall camp or not summer camp, but summer training and then fall camp, like that's just a lot to try to do before the beginning of the season. So that's something I'm very interested to see if they will do, if they'll add an immediate impact or if they add a depth piece for the future. But offensive line's a big one to me. Kyle Whittingham did straight up say that they were going to add at least one more, if not a few more wide receivers, depending on if some guys leave there. And I think it's also a good move. The number one receiver on this Utah football team right now is, of course, Dorian Singer. To me, that was a huge get and filled the biggest need that Utah had on their roster. Also, Tayshawn Lyons now with Utah. I like him a lot, but he also could end up being more of a depth piece this coming season and then next year because we just haven't seen it at the collegiate level. So maybe he could pop year one, but he's an unknown. So Singer is obviously wide receiver one. I like Money Parks. I like Munir McClain. I like Micah Pittman. I think all of them are good players who have a chance to produce. I don't know that any of them, none of them have accomplished even close to what Dorian Singer did. And all of them, it's, yes, like we like the moments we saw in Money Parks, but over the course of an entire season, we just haven't seen that level of production. Same thing for a Munir McClain. Maybe last year would have been that year if camp started. We just don't know that. So because those are unknowns, wide receiver is another area where I do think you should continue to be aggressive and try to add guys, whether it's a speedy guy on the outside, whether it's a slot guy, whether it's a big possession receiver, a skilled route runner. I think all of them can be valuable for Utah. So I would also look at wide receiver. If you feel like after spring ball that your veteran quarterback, I think Brandon Rose will do a good job being the backup quarterback this year. If you do not feel that, though, then continue to look and try to find that veteran backup quarterback. I think someone will leave after spring ball, and I think that there will be some player out there in the portal who, a lot of guys enter the portal thinking they're going to be a starter and they're not, who would welcome the opportunity to come to Utah still and either be the backup this year and then have a chance to compete next year. So that's something that's on the line to me too. Continuing on from there, because I would consider adding another QB if I'm Utah. I think defensive backs, you can never have too many defensive backs with how many Utah lost, and they've done a great job of placing them, as we'll talk about in the second segment. But DBs, just with how important it is to be strong in your coverage skills and the elite safety play that's necessary for this Utah defense. That's another one too. And then linebacker depth, you took a little bit of a hit with Justin Medlock leaving. You have your three starters, Levi Damuni, Karene Reed, and also, of course, Lander Barton, who Coach Whittingham did reveal in this interview that he would be ready as the time that spring ball rolls around. So that is an encouraging sign for Utah. And I do think, though, that there's another depth piece or two that Utah could add. Now, you still got Fotu back there, who does a good job as one of the linebackers for this team too. But I still think they could use one more depth at linebacker. But those are the main kind of five positions I look at Utah wanting to add, but they're never going to turn down talent. I mean, they added multiple pass rushers, despite having three really quality pass rushers, in my opinion, returning to the team. So once again, Utah does a good job staying active in the portal. Not surprised to see Kyle Whittingham saying that they would continue to stay aggressive there. And I'm excited to see the talent that Utah is going to bring in, because Utah has done a great job so far of replacing the talent that they lost to the NFL or via the transfer portal. I want to talk about a little bit more specifically how good of a job Utah did doing exactly that in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all a little bit more about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season is in the books, and we're already on to conference championship weekend. How about that? But there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use that there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can also find bets in the Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. And man, do we have some fun games to bet on this upcoming weekend. What a great story. The Detroit Lions, for the first time in over 30 years, they won a playoff game last week, and now they're on to the conference championship game, and they have a juggernaut in the San Francisco 49ers waiting for them, who honestly got outplayed by the Green Bay Packers, except for those final couple minutes. But once the Green Bay kicker missed that field goal, it's kind of all downhill from there. It's always funny how these stuff comes down to missed kicks, right? Because you get the Bills game and the Packers game and how much those plague. But when you're against the best teams, you just can't make those types of mistakes. So great matchup there with, I think, is going to be fantastic in the trenches in particular. We're talking about the 49ers offensive defensive lines and the same thing for the Lions. Then if you're looking at the other matchup, Lamar Jackson versus Patrick Mahomes. There's a lot of other stars in that game, especially with that way that Ravens defense is playing. Kelsey with his resurgence. And how about that Chiefs defense? They've been tremendous. Can't wait for those two games. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how they all play out. And if you guys are feeling a certain way, like you're feeling good about one in terms of making some money on it, make sure you head over to FanDuel Sportsbook. Alrighty. Going back in to talk about Utah recruiting via the transfer portal. I think they've done a tremendous job of replacing the talent that has departed the team, whether that is from the transfer portal or going off to the NFL draft. I just want to kind of go down the list of the guys that Utah lost and then talking about how good of a job I feel this coaching staff did identifying a need and then adding not just a recruit to the position, so the future, but adding an instant win now player. Yes, Utah in the recruiting rankings, they're not tremendous, but they're very good in the transfer portal rankings. And you know what else? When you have a lot of talent returning, there's not a lot of spots and opportunities to play. So that's also where I like that Utah focused more on the transfer portal, plugging specific needs, rather than just going, oh, okay, let's add a recruits for a future, because it's very hard to contribute as freshmen on these teams. Does it happen? Yes. Lander Barton, Spencer Fano contributing to success last year, but once Cole Bishop. So yes, you want to add good freshmen, and I feel like the team still did. I mean, Garcia could end up being one of the starting offensive linemen for all we know, but so I feel like Utah did a good job at adding and replacing talent to put themselves in a position where, hey, you lost these guys, identifying a need, going out in the portal and finding out how to bring it in, like we talked about in the last segment. So first, let's talk about the safeties that Utah lost. Utah, of course, lost Cole Bishop and Sione Vaki. Both those departures a little surprising. I thought that Bishop and Vaki would both stay for one more year. Bishop, I felt better about going off to the NFL than a Vaki, but Vaki decided to as well. And after the tremendous dual threat season that Vaki had and just another outstanding campaign from Cole Bishop, I was slightly surprised, but also can understand, because I do think both of them must have gotten good NFL feedback because of their the potent skills and what they bring. So you lost those two safeties out. And if you're Utah, then what do you go do? You find a safety in the transfer portal. You bring over Gilman, coming over from Stanford, who was a starter there and has made some really nice plays. And we've seen Utah continue to add transfer defensive backs that have made an impact, right? Whether it was a Miles Battle last year, or even going back to a few years ago, Utah's had other various defensive backs or just defenders in general, honestly, step up and make plays in the secondary. So I like adding Gilman there. And that's not even mentioning the other guys that you have, whether you're talking about recruiting, where Utah focused heavily on defensive backs, or talking about some of the guys in-house that Utah still already has. Like, I really liked what I saw from Nate Ritchie and Jonathan Hall in that Northwestern game. I think both those guys could potentially start. We also know that Teo Johnson is going to be changing over there. So that's where I feel like Utah did a great job, in addition to adding Gilman, of leaving themselves protected at the safety spot. And Utah has always had good safeties. So I'm just not going to be too concerned about this position for Utah once again, I just feel like they always tend to kind of figure it out. So moving on from there, another huge loss was Jonah Ellis, but we kind of figured with the year he had, you're going to go pro. And this is one that Utah doubled up on edge production. You got John Henry Daly coming over from BYU, and you also get Vaughn coming over from UTEP. Both guys who got kind of the tools of intangibles. Vaughn, 6'2", 233. John Henry Daly, 6'5", 225. Both two guys long, athletic to me, that I'm curious to see how they end up competing with a Logan Fano, also talking about Connor O'Toole, and then talk about Van Fillinger. There were some quality edge rushers on this team. Really, only 3 edge rushers at a time played for Utah. Would have been interesting to see had O'Toole didn't really come back until after O'Toole. By the time O'Toole came back, then Fano got hurt. So it would have been interesting to kind of see how that rotation would have figured itself out. And down the stretch, Utah really just had to rely on O'Toole and Van Fillinger for so much of the game. So excited that Utah added even more depth there on top of the other players. You got Chase Kennedy, who's still factored in the mix as an in-house guy too. So lots of guys on this Utah defensive line. They did a great job replacing Ellis. Then you get Satao Laumea and Keaton Bills. This is the one position where I feel like Utah didn't do a great job, as I said, adding talent through the transfer portal. But to me, you add a future starter along the offensive line, maybe even a year one starter when you're looking at Isaiah Garcia. And also just when you're talking about straight up replacing the talent that you lost, there's a guy last year, not just a Spencer Fano, of course, but you're talking about a Caleb Lomu. That's a 4-star offensive lineman too, and a guy I'm very excited about. I think he could definitely be a starter on this Utah football team come this next year too. So that would be very interesting to see if he is able to help replace the losses of Satawa and Keaton, both two massive voids. It's kind of the one area Utah hasn't done a great job replacing through the transfer portal, but as we also said, they have the talent in-house where they should be fine there. Also, Utah lost Devon Vele, crushing blow. We saw how much the Utah offense missed him in the Northwestern game, but who did they go out and get to replace him? Of course, Dorian Singer, a guy who had 1,000 yards at Arizona, then yes, dipped at USC. But how many mouths did the Trojan offense have to feed? We also saw, I heard Daniel Jeremiah, for those of you who don't know who that is, he's the NFL's lead, NFL Network's like kind of lead NFL draft guru, personnel guy and everything. And what ended up, what he said was the interior of USC's offensive line was the worst he's seen in a long time. He said it was crazy how quickly Caleb was getting pressured. So even that, you had a lot of guys to distribute it to, and you had an offensive line not performing up to standard, which when the offensive line doesn't play well, just watch the games where the offensive line didn't play well. And Bryson didn't play well. That's kind of how it worked this past year. So something very much so to keep in mind is Utah has done a good job placing Devon Vele, adding an elite receiver like Dorian Singer, a guy who has a chance to be a 1,000-yard receiver at Utah. Again, potentially more than likely going to be around that 800-yard range, in my opinion, just because you also get a Brant Kuithe back. There's lots of mouths you have to feed still on this Utah offense, but not as many pass catchers as USC had, with Singer and Brant Kuithe clearly being Kuithe still the number one option, Singer the number two just in terms of pass catchers, but the number one receiver. Love getting a guy with wide receiver one potential after you lost one, and we saw how much this offense missed Vele once again. And of course, you also had a depth piece there too, because you lose Mikey Matthews. So you add a Tayshawn Lyons, who comes over, a former 4-star from Washington, 6'1", 170, got all the tools and the intangibles. He had a lot more offers than just Washington too. This is a guy with elite receiver with a lot of talent, and obviously he sees a path to playing. Maybe year one, if not, I think he's definitely a guy who could be a starter next year. So it'll be very interesting to see how it works out for him. Utah also lost Miles Battle, and this is an area where Utah did a great job of identifying needs in the cornerback room. You get a Cameron Calhoun, a former 4-star who just spent 1 year in Michigan. Now he comes over. Then you get a Keenan Johnson who started a little bit at Georgia Tech, and now he steps up in your secondary too, on top of some other recruits in the defensive backfields. But the DB room was hit hard, and thankfully Zamiah Vaughn stayed. We even had JT Broughton transfer out, and Utah basically lost two of their top 3 to 4 corners, depending on where you want to throw Teo Johnson, with obviously Zamiah Vaughn being number one. So it was great to see them realize that and add guys with a lot of talent potential in Cameron Calhoun and a proven guy in Keenan Johnson, who I expect to fill a lot of that Miles Battle role. Or just, man, who knows? Maybe he'll fill the JT Broughton role. Maybe he'll be the other starter on the outside there. So something to keep in mind and watch for. Also, kind of an underrated one is Utah did lose Thomas Yasmin, and we had big hopes for Yasmin, and I just didn't feel like Utah did a good job, whether that was Bryson or play calling, utilizing his exceptional skill set, because we saw the plays that he made against Colorado a couple of years ago. So that's the guy that I was very disappointed not to see Utah utilize more. They lost him, but of course Utah did a great job adding through the transfer portal at tight end, where you get a Carson Ryan coming in, a guy who had over 200 yards at UCLA, and we saw Dante Moore struggles. Cam Rising, we know how much he loves to utilize the tight end. So Utah now is arguably the best tight end room in college football when you look at the potential of what a Landon King showed. Obviously, Brant Kuithe is production-wise, if he can get back to that form, should be the best tight end in college football, in my opinion. And then Carson Ryan comes in. It's a huge get. And the last guy that Utah lost that was a big impact player was Jaquindon Jackson, who, of course, transferred to Arkansas. And what did they do to replace him? You go out and you bring in a guy, Anthony Woods, who had 1,000 yards rushing last season at Idaho and now is ready to come in and join that backfield that includes some Kai Bernard and Jalen Glover. So once again, just a tremendous job by Utah adding elite talent through the transfer portal. Some proven guys and others with potential to be exceptional collegiate football players. That's not even mentioned. We didn't even dive into a ton of the recruits. I know I mentioned Garcia, but how about Isaac Wilson this offseason? If we look at Utah competing in the Big 12, not just in 2024, 2025, 2026, we'll look at the transfer/recruiting talent that they added in this offseason as to why they had that success competing at the highest level in the Big 12. But a great job by Coach Whittingham, his staff, the recruiting staff, for going in and adding that talent that is going to make a difference for Utah, obviously, this coming season. So it's exciting to see how it all clicks and works together. All righty. Before we get out of here, though, shifting off of college game. I want to talk about some of those Utes in the NFL who were in action in the divisional round. You had Utes represented in all but one game, I believe it was. Yeah, no one from Utah represented in the Lions and Buccaneers game. But outside of that, everyone else stepping up and showing out for Utah. First, let's talk about we'll go in chronological order of the games. For Utah, we saw Marcus Williams continue to do his thing in the defensive backfield, had 2 tackles and broke up a pass there. Just an exceptional safety who does a great job of limiting offenses. And that was quite the explosive passing attack when he was going against CJ Stroud. We saw what CJ Stroud has done all season, and they were not able to be as effective against this Baltimore secondary. And part of the reason was because of Williams' elite continued play. And moving on from Marcus Williams and the Baltimore Ravens to also going over and talking about what we saw from Dalton Kincaid in the Bills game. How about Dalton leading the Buffalo Bills in receiving yards in a massive playoff game? He had 5 receptions for 45 yards. His longest was 45. They were using him in the screen game. Also was very impressed with him on that one he had in the first half where he went over top and kind of caught the ball mossing the defense, the linebacker, or whoever was covering him. But Dalton Kincaid this past season, he had 673 yards overall, 73 receptions, 2 touchdowns, averaged 9 yards a catch. That's good for 56th in the NFL. And not just amongst tight ends. I'm talking about receivers. That is tremendous. And I am just very excited to see Dalton continue to grow. I think it's fun that he goes against Travis Kelce in these games because he is one of the guys who will have a chance to be considered the best tight end in the NFL in the near future. He's got some guys to pass, like no disrespect to Mark Andrews, George Kittle's still out there, TJ Hawkinson, like all those guys still ahead of him. But for what he showed in his rookie year, it's tremendous. And I'm just excited to see Dalton's continued growth. And he might be Buffalo's best pass catcher even by this time next year. Like, I'm not trying to disrespect Stephon Diggs, but he does not look like the same player he was even like a couple of years ago. It feels like he's starting to slip a little bit. And he's been around for a while. The Minneapolis Miracle took place in I think it was like 2018. So that was a long time ago that he was making that play. But congrats to Dalton on what heck of a season. Sucks to see it come to a close like that with that missed field goal late that I already talked about a little earlier. But who knows how it would have gone in overtime. There still would have been a lot of times for Patrick Mahomes to try to lead his team down the field and kick that game-winning field goal anyway. So something to keep in mind for sure. But hats off to Dalton on an incredible rookie year. And the last guy we'll talk about is Mitch Wistrcill for the San Francisco 49ers. He had 4 punts, 179 yards, averaging 44 yards a punt, and got 2 inside the punting and helped the 49ers limit the Green Bay Packers to some poor field position and make them work a little harder. Yes, the 49ers defense at times got sliced and diced a little bit, but overall, his punts helped put them in a position where it made it more challenging on that Green Bay offense. He did his job. And they still held the Packers to 21 points. If you hold a team in the postseason to 21 points, you should win. And that's what the 49ers were able to do. So going to be a lot of fun to see if who's it going to be. I would love to see a Marcus Williams versus Mitch Wistrcill. Either way, you could get another Super Bowl ring. Or, I mean, I'll say this, shout out for the Chiefs, of course, Alex Whittingham. Continuing to do a good job with them, and they continue to advance and have an opportunity. Once again, was it 7 years in a row Patrick Mahomes has played in the AFC Championship game every year he's a starter? That's just absolutely insane. So credit to him. And yeah, it's fun to watch these Utes ball out on the highest stage in the NFL. There's a lot more of them that we highlighted for their exceptional seasons too. That's going to be fun to continue to monitor over the course of their NFL career. And obviously a lot of those guys I mentioned in the previous segment departing for the NFL. So it's going to be fun to follow them in the NFL in the near future and just cover them over the course of the draft process. That's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Utes, but still have a lot to talk about, whether it is news in the transfer portal, talking about the Utah men's, women's basketball teams, and the gymnastics teams. A lot happening at the University of Utah, and Locked On Utes is your place for all things Utah sports, as it terms to the college, the University of Utah, because there are a lot of Utah sports. So we appreciate all of you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day, and we look forward to being back with you tomorrow. Have a great day.